2020 DMZ 포럼이 여러분을 초대합니다. 지구상 마지막 비무장지대 DMZ. 분단을 넘어 평화와 협력의 시대로 가는 새로운 출발. 한반도 평화와 번영의 해법을 찾는 열린 논의의 전당. 세계 최고의 석학, 국내외 유명 인사들이 한자리에 모이는 2020 DMZ 포럼. 9월 17일부터 18일까지 온라인으로 누구나 함께하실 수 있습니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2020 DMZ Forum with the theme of Beyond Division to Peace and Cooperation. My name is Se-seon and I'm your MC for today. It is my great honor to be your MC for this forum. Actually, this year, 2020, marks the 60-70th anniversary of the armistice of the Korean War. This fact demonstrates the long period of time since the devastating period that divided the Korean people into two. The DMZ Forum represents an important transition that will turn the DMZ, once a symbol of division, into a future space for peace and communication. The DMZ Forum is part of Let's DMZ, along with DMZ Festa, Live DMZ, and Art DMZ. Every year, many who wish for peace gather together to make this event a fruitful endeavor, full of events, food, and performances. Unfortunately, this year's forum is being held in a socially distanced manner online due to the continuous spread of COVID-19. However, we did our best to develop meaningful programs for you. We hope you are looking forward to this event and join us at the 2020 DMZ Forum today and tomorrow. Now let us begin the opening ceremony of the 2020 DMZ Forum. I know there are some of you who are joining us with a sense of enthusiasm, while others are less familiar about the forum. So we have prepared for you the video, so please watch it to learn what is in store for you at the 2020 DMZ Forum. Enjoy! The 2020 DMZ Forum is being held in Gyeonggi Province, the center of peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. It's time for the opening speech, so I would like to introduce Gyeonggi Province Governor, Mr. Se-seon. Let's meet him on the screen.
역사적인 9.19 평양 공동선언 2주년을 맞아서 열리는 DMZ 포럼 함께해 주시는 여러분께 진심으로 환영합니다. 경기도지사 이재명입니다. 먼저 렛츠 DMZ 행사와 오늘 포럼까지 이끌고 계신 피스메이커 임동원 조직위원장님께 각별히 존경과 감사의 마음을 전합니다. 이번에 DMZ 포럼을 공동 주최하고 국내외 평화 NGO들을 한자리에 모아주신 동북아 평화경제협회 이사장 이해찬 전 더불어민주당 대표님도 반갑고 또 감사드립니다. 포럼을 빛내주시는 이인영 통일부 장관님을 비롯한 모든 내빈 여러분께도 각별히 감사 말씀을 올립니다. 전례 없는 코로나19 상황 때문에 한자리에 모이는 대신에 이렇게 온라인으로 행사를 열게 됐습니다. 무척 아쉽지만 그 대신에 시간과 거리의 장벽 때문에 직접 참여하기 어려웠을 분들도 함께 고민을 나눌 수 있는 그런 기회가 된 측면도 있습니다. 올해 포럼의 기조는 DMZ는 평화를 원합니다 입니다. 기조에 걸맞게 아주 특별한 분들께서 기조 연설을 맡아주셨습니다. 한반도 평화에 각별한 관심을 기울여 오신 세계적인 석학 조셉 나이 교수님, 그리고 전 노벨 평화상 수상자이시기도 하고 평화운동가이신 리마 보이 여사님을 이번에 모셨습니다. 저로서는 우리 두 분의 기조 연설이 매우 기대가 됩니다. 국내외 최고의 전문가들께서도 기꺼이 패널로 참여해 주셨습니다. 훌륭한 식견을 바탕으로 한 뜻깊은 토론이 펼쳐질 것으로 기대됩니다. 올해는 평화운동 협력 세션도 신설했습니다. 국내외의 평화운동가들이 한반도 평화와 DMZ의 가치, 그리고 당면 실천 과제들을 함께 논의합니다. 정말로 유용한 자리가 될 것이라고 생각합니다. 평화는 양보할 수 없는 가치입니다. 특히 분단의 땅 한반도에 살고 있는 우리에게는 평화가 매우 절실한 과제입니다. 평화를 만드는 것도 평화를 지키는 것도 결코 쉽지 않습니다. 그러나 그렇기 때문에 더욱 의미가 크다고 생각됩니다. 남북 관계가 경색되고 대화도 어려운 지금이야말로 그 어느 때보다 평화를 위한 노력과 실천이 절실할 때입니다. 이번 포럼이 평화를 바라는 이들의 통찰과 해안을 모으는 소중한 자리가 되기를 소망합니다. 다시 한번 DMZ 포럼에 함께해 주신 모든 분들께 깊은 감사 말씀을 드립니다. 고맙습니다.
Thank you for those touching words. Thank you so much. I hope the governor's gratitude to every one of you and his wish for Korea's peace have resonated with everyone in this moment. We have our next speaker, Mr. Lee Hae-chan, Chairman of the Northeast Asia Peace Economic Association.
동북아 평화경제협회 이사장 이해찬입니다. 역사적인 2020 DMZ 포럼, DMZ는 평화를 원한다의 개회를 선언하게 되어 매우 기쁘고 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 이틀간의 심도 깊은 논의장을 마련해 주신 이재명 경기지사님, 기꺼이 기조연설을 맡아주신 리바 보이님, 조셉 나이 교수님, 각 세션에 참여해 주신 국내의 저명한 전문가 여러분과 내의 귀빈 여러분께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 전 세계적인 코로나19 팬데믹으로 이렇게 화상으로 뵙게 되어 매우 아쉽습니다. 하루빨리 코로나19 팬데믹이 진정되어 내년 2021 DMZ 포럼에서는 직접 만나 뵐 수 있기를 진심으로 기대합니다. 존경하는 참석자 여러분, 한반도의 지도를 보면 비무장지대는 한민족 공동체를 남북으로 나눈 실선이 됩니다. 우리는 수십 년간 교류와 협력을 통해 꽉 막혀 있는 실선을 서로 소통하고 협력하는 선으로 만들기 위해 많은 노력을 기울여 왔습니다. 김대중 정부와 노무현 정부를 이은 문재인 정부는 그 분단의 실선을 뚫어 평화와 소통의 점선으로 변화시키려 하고 있습니다. 저를 비롯해 평화를 염원하는 우리 민족은 마침내 그 선을 없애는 날까지 평화와 통합을 향한 전진을 결코 멈추지 않을 것입니다. 존경하는 참석자 여러분, DMZ 포럼은 분단의 상징인 비무장지대를 한반도 평화와 협력지대로 세계적인 생태와 평화의 상징으로 바꾸기 위한 장입니다. 한반도 서쪽 비무장지대의 당사자인 경기도가 그 변화에 앞장서고 있습니다. 이 자리를 빌려 이재명 지사님과 경기도민 여러분께 격려와 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 오늘부터 이틀간 DMZ 포럼에서 있을 여러분의 지혜와 열정, 토론과 나눔이 한반도 평화와 협력의 시간을 앞당기는 중요한 계기가 될 것입니다. 많은 지혜를 나누어 주시기 바랍니다. 한반도 평화와 DMZ 변화를 염원하며 이제 2020 DMZ 포럼의 개의를 여러분과 함께 선언합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you so much. After listening to the two opening speeches, my heart is pounding because I feel like I'm participating in a space where history is being made. It is unfortunate that we don't get together in person, but there are a number of participants joining us online with great interest. I was quite surprised to see so many people that are interested in Korean history as well as the country's bright future. It is an important sign that our future will be positive thanks to this support and interest, and I'm deeply moved by your presence, so thank you so much. I'm sure that many of you, despite joining us from different parts of the world, welcome this event with the same sense of hope. On behalf of everyone, Mr. Im Dong-won, Chairman of the DMZ Organizing Committee, will deliver a message. So please watch the movie.
여러분 안녕하십니까? 렛츠 DMZ 조직위원회 위원장 임동원입니다. 이번 DMZ 포럼에 많은 관심과 애정을 갖고 함께 해주시는 내외 기업인과 청중 여러분을 진심으로 환영하며 감사 인사를 드립니다. 한반도의 평화와 협력 방안을 모색하기 위해 모인 각국의 지성인과 세계적인 석학 노벨 평화상 수상자들의 메시지를 온라인으로나마 접하는 것은 무척 특별한 경험이라 할 것입니다. 국내외 전문가들이 펼치는 지혜의 향연 속에서 난국을 타개할 의미 있는 결과가 도출되기를 기대합니다. 오늘부터 열리는 2020 DMZ 포럼은 렛츠 DMZ의 4대 행사 중 하나로 DMZ의 과거와 현재를 말하고 미래를 구상하는 국제 학술 행사이자 국경을 초월한 지성인들의 축제입니다. 냉전과 분단의 유산처럼 존재하는 DMZ, 즉 비무장지대에 대한 분단과 냉전의 유산처럼 존재하는 DMZ, 즉 비무장지대에 대한 평화로운 접근 방법을 새로 마련하자는 취지로 작년에 이어 올해 두 번째 포럼을 갖게 된 것입니다. 2020 DMZ 포럼은 오늘과 내일 이틀에 걸쳐서 하버드대학 조셉 나이 교수와 노벨 평화상 수상자인 리마 오이 여사를 비롯하여 이재명 경기도 지사님의 기조 연설이 담긴 영상을 시작으로 진행합니다. 이번 2020 DMZ 포럼에서 각 분야의 최고 전문가들로 구성된 패널 여러분의 진지하고 열띤 토론을 통해 한반도의 평화와 번영은 물론 DMZ의 평화적 활용에 관한 창의적인 아이디어와 고결을 제시하고 또한 널리 공유하게 되기를 희망합니다. 끝으로 혼란스럽고 예측하기 어려운 질병과 재난 속에서도 흔들림 없이 이 행사를 준비하기 위해 헌신해 주신 모든 분들께 이 자리를 빌어 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 함께 해주시는 여러분, 이제 시작합니다. 다시 한번 2020 DMZ 포럼에 오신 것을 진심으로 환영하며 유익한 시간 되시기를 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your warm speech. Thank you so much. As you mentioned, that this forum is an international conference to discuss the past and the present and design the future of the DMZ, and is a festival for intellectuals transcending national boundaries. We begin to have high expectations for what the future holds for us. Welcome to the first half of the 2020 DMZ Forum's opening ceremony. We are meeting online in a socially distanced manner. We cannot celebrate in person, but many have shared the congratulations on this occasion. So I would like to invite Mr. Lee In-young, Minister of Reunification, for his congratulatory speech. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him.
안녕하십니까. 대한민국 통일부 장관 이인영입니다. 2020 DMZ 포럼 개최를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 평화의 DMZ, 평화의 한반도를 향한 경기도와 이재명 지사님의 열정과 노력에도 감사드립니다. 온라인으로 함께 해주시고 계신 국내외 연구자, 활동가분들과 참가자 여러분들께도 마음 깊이 감사와 환영의 인사를 전합니다. 이곳 한반도는 선선한 바람이 불어오고 하늘이 높고 푸른 계절, 가을이 시작되었습니다. 다만 지난 여름 장마와 연이은 태풍으로 남과 북 모두 큰 피해를 입은 것이 안타까울 뿐입니다. 남북이 재난과 재해를 함께 이겨내는 생명 안전 공동체로서 협력해 나갈 수 있기를 희망합니다. 남북이 뜻과 지혜를 모으면 어떤 길도 열어나갈 수 있음을 우리는 세계 앞에 증명한 바 있습니다. 2년 전 9월 19일 남과 북의 지도자는 평양 공동선언과 군사 분야 합의를 통해서 DMZ를 평화의 땅으로 만들자고 약속했습니다. 이후 전쟁과 분단의 상징이었던 DMZ는 변화의 시간을 맞이했습니다. 정전협정 이후 최초로 남과 북은 감시초소의 일부를 철수시켰고 판문점 공동경비구역에서는 모든 총기가 사라졌습니다. 화살머리 고지에서는 한국전쟁 전사자들의 유해 발굴도 이루어졌습니다. 철수한 감시초소를 따라 DMZ의 평화의 길이 조성되었고 아프리카 돼지열병으로 중단되기 전까지 15,000명이 넘는 내외국인들이 이 길을 따라 걸었습니다. 나아가 지난해 9월 문재인 대통령께서는 유엔 총회 연설을 통해 DMZ를 국제평화지대로 만들어 가자고 제안하셨습니다. 70년의 군사적 대결이 낳은 비국의 공간을 세계가 함께 가치를 누리는 평화와 생명의 공간으로 바꾸어 가자는 취지였습니다. 이제 우리는 새로운 상상력으로 DMZ와 접경지대를 바라보아야 합니다. DMZ의 남북이 공동으로 재난관리 시스템을 갖춘다면 수해, 병해충, 산불 등이 경계를 넘나들 때 가장 신속하게 감지하여 대응하고 주민들의 안전을 지킬 수 있을 것입니다. 세계의 젊은이들이 남과 북의 DMZ를 연결한 평화의 길을 따라 만남, 화해, 생명으로 가는 새로운 미래를 걷게 될 것입니다. 발전이 더디던 접경지역에도 사람이 오가고 도로와 철도가 연결되어 평화경제의 엔진이 힘차게 뛰게 될 것입니다. 오늘 포럼에 함께해 주시는 내외 귀빈 여러분, 남북관계 복원이 DMZ의 새로운 미래입니다. 남북이 다시 평화와 협력의 문 앞에 설 때 DMZ는 화해와 대화의 물줄기가 시작되는 발원지가 될 것이며, 비무장지대는 역설적인 그 명칭을 평화, 생태, 역사적 가치를 세계 속에 발신하는 국제 평화지대로 변모시키게 될 것입니다. 이를 위해 우리 정부는 남북이 약속한 합의사항을 이행하면서 인도협력과 교류협력을 재개하고 대화의 장을 다시 열어나가겠습니다. 작은 것부터 실행에 옮겨서 신뢰를 쌓고 2년 전 평양에서 남북이 함께 꿈꾸었던 한반도 평화 번영의 시대를 활짝 여는 순간도 우리 앞에 도래할 수 있도록 노력할 것입니다. 오늘 이 자리가 DMZ의 평화롭고 지속 가능한 발전을 위한 의미 있는 이정표가 되기를 바라며, 내년에는 남북관계와 여러 상황들이 획기적으로 개선되어서 지금 온라인으로 함께 하시는 모든 분들이 DMZ 평화의 길을 직접 걷고 평화의 숨결을 느끼실 수 있기를 바라는 마음도 여러분과 함께 나누어 봅니다. 오늘 막을 올리는 DMZ 포럼의 성공적인 개최와 함께 해주신 모든 분들의 건강과 행복을 기원합니다.
Thank you so much for your warm message, Minister. As he mentioned, we will be able to meet a peaceful and sustainable era soon. So I hope that the efforts we make now, we will be more brilliant. After listening to the Minister's words, I'm even more excited about being here. Now it is time to conclude the first part of the 2020 DMZ Forum. So we will be back with the second part shortly. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will wrap up the first half of this opening ceremony with a beautiful performance. So I would like to invite the performance team, the contemporary Korean music group, Black String. They will deliver a touching message with sophisticated lighting and fantastic visuals and a mysterious feel. I will be back for the second half after the performance. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the performance we prepared for you. The 2020 DMZ Forum Beyond Division to Peace and Cooperation will now begin the second part of the opening ceremony. We have prepared several keynote speeches from home and abroad. Through their authentic stories, you will be able to come face to face with the true value of peace that will bring about peaceful cooperation and joint prosperity of international society, stretching far beyond the issues of the Korean Peninsula. I'm truly excited for the stories to come, which will both challenge and move us. So the first keynote speaker is Gyeonggi Province Governor, Mr. Lee Jae-myung. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him.
존경하는 1370만 경기도민 여러분, 그리고 한반도에 살고 계신 8천만 동포 여러분, 평화를 염원하는 전 세계 모든 분들께 인사드립니다. 경기도지사 이재명입니다. 진정한 권력은 무력이 아니라 타인의 마음을 사로잡는 매력에 있음을 일깨워 주신 조셉 나이 교수님, 비폭력 평화 운동을 통해서 여성의 안전과 인류 평화를 증진시키신 리마 보이 여사님과 이 자리를 함께 할 수 있어 정말로 큰 영광으로 생각합니다. 전 세계가 코로나19와 싸우고 있습니다. 감염병은 우리의 일상을 완전히 바꿔놓았습니다. 당연하게 여겼기 때문에 무심코 지나쳤던 것들이 이제는 얼마나 소중한 것인지 절감하고 있습니다. 만약에 다시 돌아갈 수만 있다면 우리의 일상이 위태로워지지 않도록 더욱 노력해야 되겠다는 그런 생각을 해봅니다. 그러나 안타깝게도 우리는 코로나19 이전으로 되돌아갈 수는 없습니다. 우리가 할 수 있는 일이라고는 평온한 일상을 되찾기 위해서 가능한 모든 노력을 다하는 것뿐입니다. 평화도 마찬가지입니다. 지금으로부터 70년 전 우리가 발딛고 살아가는 이 땅에서 정말로 끔찍한 전쟁이 있었습니다. 수많은 사람들이 숨지고 수많은 것들이 파괴됐습니다. 이 잔인한 전쟁은 멈추었을 뿐이지 끝나지 않았습니다. 폐허를 딛고 쌓아 올린 모든 것들이 다시 한순간에 무너질 가능성이 여전히 상존합니다. 익숙해져서 느끼지 못할 뿐 전쟁에 대한 경험과 공포는 여전히 우리의 일상을 지배하고 있습니다. 작은 충격에도 쉽게 흔들리고 깨지는 이 불안정한 삶을 지속할 수는 없습니다. 되돌릴 수 없다면 새로 만들어야 합니다. 소극적이고 불안정한 평화가 아닌 적극적이고 항구적인 평화가 우리의 일상이 되도록 반드시 만들어야 합니다. 전쟁의 공포를 끝내고 평화가 일상이 되도록 하는 것, 그 토대 위에서 번영의 성취를 새로 이루어내는 것, 그것이 바로 우리가 지금 이 자리에서 해야 될 일입니다. 평화는 저절로 주어지는 것이 아닙니다. 힘들여 스스로 만들어 가야 하는 것입니다. 우리는 평화를 만들기 위해 끊임없이 노력해왔고 또 성과도 있었습니다. 2년 전 4월 27일 남과 북의 정상이 판문점에서 만났습니다. 문재인 대통령과 김정은 위원장의 도보다리 회담은 전 세계인의 깊은 감동과 울림을 주었습니다. 그리고 그로부터 또다시 5개월 뒤인 2018년 9월 19일 두 정상은 다시 역사적인 공동선언을 발표했습니다. 미국의 트럼프 대통령이 김정은 위원장과 함께 군사 분계선을 넘고 남북미 정상이 판문점에서 만나는 놀라운 광경이 펼쳐졌습니다. 그렇게 평화의 단초를 만들었지만 평화를 지키는 것은 여전히 쉽지 않았습니다. 베트남 하노이에서 열린 북미 대화는 성과 없이 끝나버렸고 남북 관계는 다시 차가운 각오로 돌아가서 다시는 나아가지 못하고 있습니다. 급기야 남북 교류 협력의 상징인 남북 공동연락사무소도 폭파되고 말았습니다. 아쉽게도 남북 관계는 다시 얼어붙었습니다. 그렇다고 해서 포기할 수는 없습니다. 옳은 길이라면 시련과 고난이 있다고 해도 앞으로 나아가야 합니다. 우리 경기도는 DMZ를 품고 있는 대한민국 최대의 지방정부입니다. 남북관계의 영향을 가장 먼저 가장 크게 받는 곳이기도 합니다. 그렇기 때문에 남북관계 발전과 한반도 평화 정착에 대한 막중한 사명감과 책임의식을 갖지 않을 수 없습니다. 평화와 번영의 한반도 시대를 열기 위해서 우리 경기도가 할 수 있는 최선의 노력을 다해 나갈 생각입니다. 남북 간 교류를 통해 신뢰를 회복하고 평화를 정착시켜서 번영의 길로 가고자 합니다. 그것이 바로 남북 모두에게 이익이라고 확신합니다. 그런 차원에서 이 자리를 빌려 몇 가지 협력 사업을 북측에 제안드립니다. 첫째, 한반도 보건 증진을 위해 남북 간 공동 방역과 의료 협력을 제안드립니다. 아프리카 돼지열병과 코로나19에서 보는 것처럼 전염병과 감염병은 이제 국경으로 막을 수가 없습니다. 공동의 피해를 막고 모두의 안전을 확보하려면 남북 공동 방역 협력 체계를 구축해야 합니다. 우리는 이미 말라리아 공동 방역 경험을 갖고 있습니다. 남북 간 보건 의료 분야 전문가들을 비롯한 인적, 물적 교류를 통해서 각종 질병에 효과적으로 대응할 수 있습니다. 이를 위해서 개풍, 개성 일원의 남북 공동 보건 방역 센터를 설립할 것을 제안합니다. 우리 경기도가 쌓아온 방역 역량과 북측의 국가 비상 방역 체계 경험을 서로 공유하고 임상치료 정보를 교류하는 새로운 거점이 될 것으로 기대합니다. 둘째, 임진강과 북한강 수계 관리 협력 사업입니다. 수해 방지와 통합적인 물 관리를 위해서 남북 공동 수계 관리 기구를 설치하도록 제안합니다. 남측은 홍수 피해를 막고 북측은 갈수기 건천화와 물 부족 사태를 예방하는 데 서로 기여할 것입니다. 이와 더불어서 풍부한 수량으로 생산된 전력을 북측에 제공하면 남북 모두 이익을 얻을 수가 있습니다. 셋째, 경기도 접경 지역과 밀접하게 관련 있는 사업에 대한 남북 공동 조사 연구를 제안합니다. 한강 하구의 남북 공동 수로 조사 재개와 함께 서해 경제 공동 특구 조성 사업을 상호 합의한 대로 반드시 이행해야 합니다. 비무장지대 안에 개성과 판문점 등과 연계해서 남북이 자유롭게 오갈 수 있는 평화공원을 조성할 수 있도록 조사 연구를 하고 싶습니다. 넷째, 남북 공동 산림보건사업과 농촌 종합개발사업을 재개하도록 제안합니다. 경기도는 지방정부 최초로 양묘장 조성 물품과 스마트폰 시대에 대한 UN 대북 제재 면제 승인을 받은 바가 있습니다. 대북 제재 걱정이 사라진 만큼 개풍 양묘장과 농촌 시범마을 조성 재개를 위한 남북 간 협의를 서둘러 재개해야 합니다. 이제 마지막으로 이 모든 사업에 앞서 긴급한 대북 수해복구 지원 사업에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 연이은 태풍으로 남측의 피해도 크지만 북측의 피해는 상상을 초월할 정도로 심각하다고 들었습니다. 같은 민족으로서 동포가 어려울 때 돕는 것은 당연지사입니다. 1984년 우리가 큰 홍수 피해를 입었을 때 북측 역시 쌀과 의약품을 비롯한 구호물자를 조건 없이 남측에 지원한 바가 있습니다. 우리 경기도는 형편이 가능한 범위에서 조건 없이 대북 수해복구 지원 사업에 나서겠습니다. 앞서 말씀드린 제안들을 실천하려면 북측의 참여가 반드시 필요합니다. 경기도는 언제 어디서든 대화할 준비가 되어 있습니다. 북측의 통큰 결심과 참여를 기대합니다. 국회에도 요청드립니다. 대북전단 금지법 제정, 남북 정상선언 비준 같은 현안을 조속하게 처리해서 평화 협력에 대한 우리의 의지를 북측은 물론 전 세계에 신속하게 보여줄 수 있기를 기대합니다. 쉽지 않은 길이지만 반드시 가야 할 길. 한반도 평화 시대를 함께 열기 위해서 모두 함께 해주시기를 부탁드립니다. 고맙습니다.
Thank you for your kind words. I think I realize once again how valuable peace is. We all have to work hard together in the future. Thank you. Next, we will hear from the world-renowned scholar who developed the theory of soft power, Professor Emeritus Joseph Nye of Harvard University's Kennedy School. Let's meet him on the screen.
It's my pleasure to address the DMZ Forum of 2020 today, and I'm going to speak about China-America relations and peace in Korea. As an introduction, let me say that South Korea is one of the world's great success stories. Over the past half century, it has evolved from an embattled and impoverished country to a prosperous and democratic country. It has done so despite severe obstacles. Geography has placed the Korean Peninsula next to large nations who have tried to limit its independence, and history left the Korean Peninsula divided at the end of the Second World War. The prospects for peace and prosperity are complicated by great power politics. As a geographical neighbor, China is bound to have influence on the peninsula, and South Korea has balanced the power of its large Chinese, Japanese, and Russian neighbors, allying with a distant power, the United States, which has no territorial claims in the region. This alliance has kept the overall peace and South Korean independence, but it has had its dangerous moments. More recently, China and the US have cooperated in trying to contain the North Korean nuclear threat. At the same time, South Korea has benefited from trade and investment with China, the world's second largest economy, and the country with the most economic influence over North Korea. Thus, South Korean peace and prosperity will be strongly influenced by the state of relations between the US and China. Unfortunately, as the London Economist described the situation on August 1st, the two countries distrust each other more now than at any point since Richard Nixon went to China almost 50 years ago. As presidential elections draw near, the potential for dangerous miscalculations is growing. This is not good for South Korea, but the careful management of a cooperative rivalry is possible, and it would include the containment of the North Korean nuclear threat. Let me now turn to the evolution of US-China relations. Ever since US Vice President Mike Pence's harsh criticism of China in 2019, many observers have been talking about a new Cold War. This was reinforced by speeches in 2020 by Secretary of State Michael Pompeo and other officials. While it's true that the United States and China have entered a new phase in their relationship, my view is that the Cold War metaphor is misleading. During the real Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union targeted tens of thousands of nuclear weapons at each other and had virtually no trade or cultural ties. By contrast, China has a more limited nuclear force. Annual Sino-American trade totals at $500 billion, and more than 350,000 Chinese students and 3 million tourists are in the US each year. A better description of today's bilateral relationship is cooperative rivalry. Since the end of World War II, US-China relations have gone through three phases that lasted roughly 2 decades each. Hostility marked the 20 years after the Korean War, followed by limited cooperation against the Soviet Union during the phase that followed President Nixon's famous 1972 visit. The Cold War's end ushered in a third phase of economic engagement, with the US helping China's global economic integration, including its entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Yet in the first post-Cold War decade, President Bill Clinton's administration hedged its bets by simultaneously strengthening the US-Japan alliance and improving relations with India. Now, since 2017, President Donald Trump's official national security strategy focuses on great power rivalry, with China and Russia designated as America's main adversaries. While many Chinese analysts blame this fourth phase on the clumsy leadership of US President Donald Trump, Chinese leaders are also to blame. By rejecting Deng Xiaoping's prudent policy of maintaining a low international profile, by ending presidential term limits, and by proclaiming his nationalistic China dream, Xi Jinping created disillusion in Washington with the prior American policy of engagement. The view of China within the US has already begun to sour before the 2016 presidential election. Trump's rhetoric and tariffs were merely gasoline poured on a smoldering fire that China had lit. The American liberal international order helped China sustain rapid economic growth and reduce poverty dramatically. But China also tilted the trade field to its advantage by subsidizing state-owned enterprises, engaging in commercial espionage, and requiring foreign firms to transfer their intellectual property to domestic partners. While most economists argue that Trump was mistaken to focus on the bilateral trade deficit, many supported his complaints about China's efforts to challenge America's technological advantage. Moreover, China's growing military strength adds a security dimension to the bilateral relationship. China's creation of artificial islands in the South China Sea did not meet the standards of international law, but China rejected the judgment of the Hague Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. The US replied by sailing naval vessels close to the artificial islands to support traditional freedom of navigation. Moreover, China proceeded to militarize the islands despite assurances to President Obama that it would not do so. In addition, China challenged Japan's control of the Diaoyu Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, despite China's declaration that they were covered by the provisions, despite Obama's declaration that they were covered by the provisions of the US-Japan Security Treaty. While this fourth phase of the US-China relationship is not a Cold War, owing to the high degree of interdependence that we have, it is much more than a typical trade dispute. In addition, this fourth phase of the relationship has been marked by technological nationalism. When China listed a set of technologies it aimed to control by 2025, and when Xi announced that China intended to lead the world in artificial intelligence by 2030, it was seen as a direct challenge in Washington. In addition to the efforts of Huawei to develop the fifth generation of telecommunications technology, which would be central to the future of the internet, many Americans felt that it was important to have restrictions on Chinese investment and corporate activities. China complained, but did nothing to ease its already pre-existing security restrictions on American companies like Google and Facebook. Some analysts believe that this current phase in the US-China relationship marks the beginning of a conflict in which an established hegemon goes to war with a rising challenger. In his explanation of the Peloponnesian War, the Greek historian Thucydides famously argued that it was caused by Sparta's fear of a rising Athens. These analysts believe that China's rise will create a similar fear in the United States, and also cite the analogy of World War I, when a rising Germany set hegemonic Britain on edge. However, such historical analogies are much too simple. The causes of World War I were far more complex and included growing Russian power, which created fear in Germany, rising nationalism in the Balkans and other countries, and the risk deliberately taken by the Habsburg Empire to stave off its decline. Even more important, Germany had already surpassed Britain in industrial production by 1900, while China's GDP, measured in dollars, currently is only 2/3 the size of the US economy. The US has more time and assets to manage the rise of Chinese power than Britain had with Germany. China is constrained by a natural balance of power in Asia, in which Japan, the world's third largest economy, and India, which is about to surpass China in population, have no desire to be dominated by China. Succumbing to the fear that Thucydides described would be an unnecessary self-fulfilling prophecy for the US. Neither China nor the US poses an existential threat to the other, the way that Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union did. China is not about to invade the US and is unable to expel America from the Western Pacific, where most countries welcome the American presence as a balance against overbearing Chinese influence. Japan, a major part of the so-called First Island chain, pays nearly 3/4 of the host nation costs to keep 50,000 US troops based there. And the American security guarantee helps Japan to maintain its status as a non-nuclear weapon state. Similarly, the American alliance provides a security guarantee that protects South Korea against potential Chinese encroachments on its autonomy. But like other states in the region, Korea wants good relations with both the US and China. Let me now look at the future of US-China relations. While miscalculation is always possible, I believe that the US can manage its relationship with China without a breakdown into conflict. An American strategy must rest on careful assessment of the China challenge. It's equally dangerous to over or underestimate Chinese power. Underestimation breeds complacency, while overestimation creates fear, either of which can lead to miscalculation. Before the COVID crisis, China had a slowing growth rate and declining exports. China is investing heavily in military power, but remains far behind the United States in global military power. And in the soft power of attraction, international polls show that Xi Jinping thought is not very popular in most of the world. China has a communist party without communism. In contrast, the US support for human rights enhances its soft power in much of the world. Moreover, the United States has major geopolitical advantages. Geographically, it's bordered by oceans and friendly neighbors, while China has territorial disputes with India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and others. A second advantage the US has is energy. The shale oil and gas revolution has transformed the United States from an importer to an exporter. China, on the other hand, is highly dependent on energy imports passing through the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. The United States also has a demographic advantage with a workforce that's likely to grow by 5% over the next decade, while China's will shrink. China's working age population peaked in 2015, and India will soon pass China as the world's most populous nation. And America remains at the forefront in the key technologies of biotechnology, nanotechnology, and information technology. American research universities dominate higher education, while no Chinese university ranks in the top 25 globally. While the United States holds these high cards, a misguided strategy could lead to the United States to discard its aces of alliances and international institutions, or to severely restrict immigration. When I once asked former Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew why he did not think China would surpass the United States as a global power, he pointed to America's ability to draw on the talents of the entire world and to recombine them in a diversity that enhanced creativity. Given its ethnic nationalism, this kind of openness is not possible for China. A successful American strategy toward China would aim to avoid either a hot or a cold war, while cooperating when possible and competing when necessary. The strategic objective would be to shape China's external behavior by strengthening alliances and international institutions, and by bolstering our economy and technological advantages at home. While China derives power from controlling access to its vast market, so does the United States, while also offering openness and values that greatly increase its soft power of attraction. In addition, America's military power of deterrence is welcomed by the many countries that want to maintain friendly relations with China, but do not want to be dominated by it. The US should regard the China relationship as a cooperative rivalry, where we can pay equal attention to both the aspects of this term, cooperation and rivalry. If we avoid demonization of China and avoid misleading historical analogies such as a Cold War, we can manage such a strategy and avoid conflict between the two countries. Let me now turn to the problem of North Korea and the implications for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Even if the US and China manage their relationship in a manner that avoids conflict and promotes peace and prosperity in the region, there's still a wild card to the deck, North Korea. Management of that problem will require close relations between Seoul and Washington, but also between Beijing and Washington. North Korea speaks of peace and disarmament, but it is violating its international promises, including its non-proliferation treaty commitments. It would like to disrupt the US-South Korean alliance and to have a freer hand to try to unify the peninsula on terms dictated by the Kim regime. The six-party talks made little progress, and President Trump was only the latest American to deceive himself into believing he could negotiate denuclearization with Kim. But Kim does not want to give up his weapons, and North Korea has announced that it has mastered nuclear strike capability and become a full-fledged nuclear state. Both the US and China have declared that they seek a non-nuclear Korean peninsula, but thus far, they've not been able to bring that about. It's important to dispose of several myths that interfere with clear analysis of the situation. First, Kim Jong-un may be a dictator, but he's not crazy or suicidal. Thus far, he has outplayed the US and China in this high-stakes card game, but he has understood that a nuclear exchange with the US means the end of the regime he's trying to preserve. Second, we often exaggerate how much power Kim's rocketry gives him. North Korea has had nuclear weapons for more than a decade, and they can be delivered to East or West Coast American ports by other means than just rockets. Third, in his game of bluff and chicken, geography provides North Korea with local escalation dominance. With thousands of artillery tubes hidden in tunnels near the border, North Korea can threaten to wreak havoc on Seoul by conventional means. The US found this out in 1994 when it considered a preemptive strike to destroy the Yongbyon plutonium reprocessing plant that violated the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but discovered that its allies in South Korea and Japan were deterred by the risk of conventional retaliation long before North Korea had nuclear weapons. China has often proposed a solution called a freeze for a freeze. North Korea would halt all nuclear missile tests, which is easily verifiable, and while that would not reverse Kim's nuclear status, it would slow the development of his arsenal. In turn, the US would halt the annual military exercises that it conducts with South Korea. We would reserve the right to resume exercises if North Korea violated its test ban or exported nuclear materials. Some see this as a good deal, but it depends on how one assesses Kim Jong-un's objectives. If all he wants is security, we could just leave him alone, perhaps sign a peace treaty, relax sanctions, and let economic growth change the regime. But the Kim regime is not a status quo power. Since 1945, it has been an oddity as a hereditary communist dictatorship whose legitimacy rests on claiming to be the vanguard of Korean nationalism. Thus far, it has fallen behind in the economic competition with the South, but it hopes its nuclear status will change the balance. Some analysts believe that menacing the US is a means of isolating and exercising dominance over South Korea, and a means for the regime of Kim Jong-un to ensure its long-term survival. If weakening the ties between the US and South Korea is central to Kim's strategy, China's freeze for freeze proposal plays into his hands. And rather than reduce risks, it may embolden the North to return to the risky conventional pressures on South Korea, such as it exercised in 2010 when it sank a South Korean frigate and shelled South Korean islands. The short-term policy alternatives are not promising. One is a limited use of force if diplomacy fails. but such an approach would trigger a disaster. Even if designed as a limited strike, would a decapitation effort or missile shoot-down stay limited? If not, casualties could range from the tens of thousands to much higher numbers. Sanctions continue to be an option, but thus far their pressure has not been enough to make the Kim regime give up what it thinks of as its key nuclear asset. Chinese diplomacy and sanctions are crucial, but thus far China has pulled its punches. China does not like Kim or his nuclear weapons, but even less does it want chaos on its border or Americans in North Korea. A possible negotiating package would be something like the Cold War slogan GRIT, or gradual reduction of international tension. The US would assure China of our limited goals and agree to coordination of actions. No surprises, no marches to the Yalu River. China would use its economic pressure and diplomacy to freeze the immediate threat posed by North Korean tests, but not insist on a freeze on US forces. Possible scaling back of US exercises in the future would depend on North Korean behavior towards South Korea. The US would offer to negotiate a peace treaty with North Korea if it accepts détente and takes steps to improve its relations with South Korea. Some sanctions would be relaxed depending on the progress in this détente. US and China would accept North Korea's de facto nuclear status for now, but jointly restate our long-term objectives of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. North Korea agrees to stop tests under this plan and no further exports of nuclear materials. China threatens sanctions on food and fuel if Pyongyang cheats or breaks the agreement. Now, the prospects for such a negotiated package may not be high, and if it fails, we have to remember that the US and South Korea should not panic. The alliance could still keep the peace until there's change in North Korea. If the US could deter a much stronger Soviet Union from taking an isolated West Berlin for 3 decades, we can deter North Korea. We should reinforce our defense capability regarding our alliance with South Korea and Japan. We should stay in constant diplomatic talks with China. We should agree that North Korean nuclear exports or aggressive actions towards South Korea will be met with punitive sanctions. The presence of nearly 50,000 American troops in Japan and some 28,000 in Korea makes our extended deterrence credible. Kim Jong-un cannot kill South Koreans or Japanese without killing Americans, and that would mean the end of his regime. If Seoul, Washington, and Beijing work together to play for the long run and play the long game, we can achieve our common interest of containment and peace on the Korean Peninsula, and that is our firm wish. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you will have a very successful conference.
Thank you very much for your wonderful speech, Professor Nai. We now have one more keynote speaker, so I would like to introduce our second speaker. A peace activist from Liberia, she contributed to the end of the Liberian Civil War by leading a women's nonviolent peace movement. Thanks to her dedication, Ms. Lima Boy was a co-recipient of 2011 Nobel Peace Prize. Let's listen to her message.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, youth groups, women activists, one and all. It is with great joy and pleasure that I deliver this keynote at this DMZ Forum titled Beyond Division to Peace and Cooperation. The theme of this gathering is a befitting title, especially in a world polarized and divided on many fronts. Religious, ethnic, racial, and ideological divisions continuously destroy our world's very fabric and are causing hardship and pain for many people around the globe. The world is in dire need of peace, justice, and sustainable development. Every day, there are calls for cessation of aversions from Africa to Asia to Europe, from America to the Arab world. Women and children in all scenarios bear the greatest brunt of divisions and crises. For many years, I have dedicated my life to the fight for peace and gender equality. My work has taken me to many places in the world. In all of these spaces and places, though the context may be different, the pain, hopelessness, and agony caused by war are the same. Young people in conflict-ridden areas find it increasingly difficult to visualize a future for themselves. In Libya, a few years ago, a group of young people told me that they could not even imagine their lives 30 minutes from the time we had gathered. During our debrief session at the end of the trip, we stressed to our partners that the armed groups in Libya would dramatically multiply if the international community continued to ignore the security context. 4 to 5 years later, the situation has evolved to exactly as we predicted. The number of armed groups in Libya has progressed immensely. In November of 2013, I was invited to Busan, South Korea for the World Council of Churches event. My time in Busan uniquely exposed me to the human side of the Korean conflict. Before my intimate exposure, my limited understanding of the conflict was informed primarily by westernized political analysis and militarized discussions. I bless God for sending 2 young people my way who made the political personal. When we met, they told me about the Korean conflict and how it led to the separation of them and their great-grandparents. They willed that they were holding on, some of their grandparents were holding on tight to life and hoped to be reunited with their family members one day. I could not help but ask more questions about the tragic nature of their separation from their great-grandparents. And the more questions I asked, the more emotional I became. You see, as a survivor of war, I could relate all too well to how human-made conflicts are readily victorious in separating people from their loved ones. The emotional toll of not knowing when and where you will see your family members is unfathomable. 2 years after Busan, on the 60th anniversary of the division of the Korean Peninsula, I joined a group of 30 women leaders from 12 countries for an unprecedented peace walk across the demilitarized zone that separates North and South Korea. The peace walk called for many things. Prominent among them was an end to the Korean War by replacing the 1953 Peace Armistice Agreement with a permanent peace treaty between the warring countries. 5 years after the peace walk, I have made a list of a few reasons why I courageously walk in solidarity with the women and men of North and South Korea who yearn for reconciliation and reuniting of their families. 1. The most obtrusive of all is my experience working with the women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. In 2003, a group of us Liberian women started a nonviolent protest, which greatly contributed to ending Liberia's 14-year civil war that killed 250,000 people, forced 500,000 out of their country, and made about 1 million internally displaced within the borders of Liberia. The Women of Liberia Peace Movement taught me that when women raise their voices, even in the darkest moments, dynamics tend to shift. The second reason is my admiration for the power of women's leadership in peace-building processes. In all of my participation in peace negotiations over the past 15 years, I have seen firsthand that when women gather for peace, you see less of the politics of egos and power play. When women gather for peace, we create lasting change by reminding people of war's cruelty. Most importantly, we intentionally place those directly affected by conflict in the center of the resolution process instead of treating them as abstract. Last but not least, women's drive, commitment, and tenacity inarguably create lasting peace in intense conflict contexts. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's been almost 70 years since the Korean War ended in an armistice agreement that brought about a complete cessation of hostilities and called for the signing of a permanent peace agreement. Although the armistice succeeded in stopping shooting at the 38th parallel for nearly 70 years now, which is by far the most densely militarized area on Earth, the reality is a ceasefire agreement is not the same as permanent peace treaty between both parties. To this day, the 30th parallel constitutes a festering sore on the face of the peninsula, leaving both sides ever on alert with suspicion and fear. This unresolved conflict has caused the separation of over 10 million families with absolutely no glimpse of reunification. I have been told that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result. My own country, Liberia, for 14 years was a true definition of insanity in its quest for peace and stability. Attempts to resolve Liberia's civil conflict saw over 24 peace conferences, over a dozen peace agreements, and many political pledges and commitments. None of those concerted efforts ever brought about the peace that Liberians yearn for, until Liberia's women launched a mass action for peace. In my firmest belief, the campaign changed the trajectory of the peace process. It moved the conversation from barriers to cooperation. It redirected the theme from militarism to people and the impact the war plays on their livelihood. For years, the Korean War has been centered around not just the North and South, but also a hegemon of those who are overly invested in the politics and benefits of the war at the expense of the poor civilians. Your Excellencies, no nation on the face of this earth can fully embrace peace if the conversation is void of civilians, their daily realities and future, and is solely focused on weaponization and politics. Some may argue that this is a simplistic view to end one of the most protracted and polarized conflicts. Still, I say to them, political conversations alone can never break down barriers. Whilst it is true that politics is one of the elements in breaking down barriers, the involvement of people, their needs and aspirations should be at the center of every discussion surrounding peace. For over half a century, the Korean leaders on both sides, North and South, have failed to integrate the people's call to demolish the barrier. Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for the Korean people to experience absolute peace and cooperation, permit me to kindly proffer the following recommendations. Engage in a Korean-only peace dialogue void of external parties. Administer the signing of a peace agreement that will officially end the Korean War. Engage in an inter-Korean cooperation through economic and cultural activities. Build trust and engage instead of isolation. Facilitate the reunion of divided families. In 2015, we made the journey to Pyongyang and to Seoul. The trip happened after months of planning and many conversations. I was glad to have formed a part of the group of women that made that historic trip. At the end, we walked the DMZ. We made it to South Korea amidst loud cheers and some boos, but it was worth it. The question one may ask, did we achieve peace? My answer is a resounding yes. You see, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, peace is not just about ending war. Peace is about the creation of conditions that dignifies all people. On our visit to both the North and South, we had the opportunity to sit, to listen to each other's stories. We had moments to embrace and to share meals. We spent days dignifying each other's humanity. We broke down barriers and gave hope to those who had lost all hope. To sum it all up, we moved beyond barriers and took a few steps closer to cooperation and peace. My prayer is that this will happen once and for all for the people of North and South Korea. I thank you.
What great speeches from the three speakers. Thank you very much for your speeches. This brings us to the end of the 2020 DMZ Forum. Having been part of the opening ceremony, I'm looking forward to a happier and stronger Korean peninsula, where we can teach the meaning of peace to future generations. The future lies on a Korean peninsula that serves as a major hub of domestic and international peace movements. 2020 DMZ Forum, the opening ceremony ends here, but the forum will last until tomorrow. So ladies and gentlemen, please continue to remember the DMZ, which is part of our past, the present, and the future. This has been Son Young-jung, and thank you very much for your good attention and participation. Thank you.